Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned. Because it's Wednesday, that means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team-up that we do once a week. And this week, we've got a true piece of comic book history to talk about today. The comic book we're talking about is Superman versus Spider-Man. This was a pretty big deal. Showed up in a big oversized super special back in 1976 when I was just 5 years old. I didn't get it until a couple years later used somehow. Somehow it ended up in the house. And at the time, when I read it for the first time, I didn't realize what a big deal it was to have Spider-Man and Superman in the same comic book. But of course, it's a really, really big deal for Marvel Comics and DC Comics to have teamed up for this one-shot comic book adventure. And it's pretty fantastic. They knew it had to be epic. Spider-Man and Superman meeting the most popular characters from Marvel and DC. Well, certainly Spider-Man was the most popular character at Marvel at the time. I'm not sure if he still is. He ought to be. And Superman, of course, even if he was overshadowed by Batman even then, and he might have been, Superman is the greatest superhero of all time. And so it's very appropriate that Superman and Spider-Man meet in this issue. And I don't have the original super special anymore, which is unfortunate. I don't even know what happened to it. I was too young to remember. It was probably given away or something terrible like that. Who knows? I have it in this big omnibus. This is the DC versus Marvel omnibus, which is fantastic, which has all of the major, or at least most of the major team-ups between Marvel and DC characters. And there were a lot of them. There were actually more than I remember there being. But for a while, it wasn't unusual to have Marvel and DC characters team up once in a while in a special issue. And so you have like Batman meeting Daredevil and Superman meeting the Fantastic Four and all kinds of characters having adventures together. So it's pretty cool stuff in here. But the one we're talking about today, that was the very first time that this happened. And it must have been truly shocking, when you stumbled upon this back in 1976, because this is back in the days before there were previews, there was no internet, there was no way really to know, I don't think, that this was coming out ahead of time, unless they had a few advertisements in comics here and there. But otherwise, you were probably pretty surprised to see this come out. This is a pretty big deal. And they took advantage of the size of the oversized comic book that it appeared in, because it is truly epic. It is edited by Carmine Infantino and Stan Lee, written by Jerry Conway, drawn by Ross Andru with inks by Dick Giordano, and it looks great. It just looks fantastic. So Ross Andru, who was a Spider-Man artist, I think at the time, just did a magnificent job on this. I mean, what a wonderful job he did. I mean, look at that opening double page, splash page of Superman. So the way they structured this, they had to kind of make it even between Superman and Spider-Man. Of course, they had to have a fight, which is ridiculous because Spider-Man is so much weaker than Superman. And they knew it, so they had to figure out a way for that to happen. And they did. But in this opening spread, we've got Superman flying up against a giant robot, which of course happens pretty frequently in Metropolis. Superman's always fighting some giant monster or robot. And here he does, and this giant monster, or giant robot I should say, is controlled by Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is in there. The evil villain Lex Luthor, who had been the chief villain in the DC universe for decades, up against Superman. And he gets away, and we have a little interlude where we have lots of characters from the Superman comic book at the time. At the time, it was kind of strange because Clark Kent in the 70s in a lot of the 70s anyway, wasn't working at the newspaper, the Daily Planet. He was an anchor man on television, which is ridiculous. It's absurd. What a dumb idea that was. I mean, you're Superman. Your only disguise is glasses, and you're going to go on television where everybody can see you, and then there'll be a news story with Superman in it, and no one's supposed to. Even hypno glasses aren't going to help you over television. So it was a bad idea. Eventually, Superman tracks down the evil Lex Luthor and defeats him pretty quickly, actually, and sends him to jail. And then we have a really quick one-page origin of Superman, just for like the 2 or 3 people in the world who didn't know Superman's origin at the time. This is actually before the movie, so it's possible that, you know, some people out there didn't know Superman's origin. And then we get Spider-Man. Look at that. Another awesome 2-page spread. Spider-Man looks great. Spider-Man's going to catch some crooks, but then he runs into Dr. Octopus. So we have Dr. Octopus up against Spider-Man. We have the Spider-Man section. And we have all the Spider-Man characters that were around at the time. There's J. Jonah Jameson. There's Mary Jane. You know. And again, just beautiful artwork, really taking advantage of that oversized issue. And this was magnificent in the oversized comic book. I remember like lying on the floor with this spread out, just looking at it and reading it over and over again, because it was pretty fantastic. What a great issue. Then we have Spider-Man's origin retold in 1 page, you know, for the few people who didn't know Spider-Man's origin, which I guess in 1976 is possible. But then Lex Luthor meets Dr. Octopus in jail. Foolishly, they were put in the same jail. So security lacks as usual in comic book world. And of course, it takes him about 20 seconds to escape. And Dr. Octopus and Lex Luthor have escaped together. You get their origin stories real quick. And so now we have the Duel of Titans. The Duel of Titans. So Dr. Octopus and Lex Luthor are working together. And we have our characters interacting. And one interesting thing about this comic book that I should mention is that in this comic book, there is no explanation as far as there being a Marvel universe and there being a DC universe. In this comic book, at least, it's all one universe. And it's just kind of left that way. It's as if Marvel and DC characters always existed in the same world. That way, they didn't have to explain anything. So it was an interesting way to do it. Where it was just like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Marvel and DC comics, they all exist in the same world. Why not? And so now we have our characters interacting like it's no big deal. There's Lois Lane and Peter Parker. And then we have Superman and Spider-Man. There's a misunderstanding, because there always has to be a misunderstanding when superheroes first meet in order for them to stupidly fight. You know, and as usual, if they just stood there and talked to each other for a minute, they would realize, you know, that they wouldn't have to fight. And of course, Spider-Man, he has no chance against Lex Luthor. But Lex Luthor has this device which is going to give Spider-Man extra strength. And so he's going to strengthen up Spider-Man so that Spider-Man and Superman will be more evenly matched and they could just kick the crap out of each other, which they do. And so we have this awesome fight where Spider-Man just clocks Superman. And Spider-Man doesn't really seem to understand what's going on here. He doesn't realize that he's been given extra power. He just thinks Superman's a lot wimpier than he had been told that Superman was. And so, yeah, this is their historic first meeting where they're just going to beat up on each other, because that's how superheroes meet. But the artwork is just great. I mean, it really moves, and it's just a great fight. It's a dumb fight, as usual, But then Spider-Man's, this is very temporary power. And so his power starts to wear off. And Superman has to give him like the lightest punch he can. He pulls his punch, but that still makes Spider-Man fly across the city. And just look at that, the way this page is drawn with him, with Spider-Man on the side there, with the buildings on the side, because when Spider-Man's flying through the air, it's just, the way it's laid out is just awesome. I love it. And Spider-Man comes back and realizes, okay, well, I guess I can't beat Superman after all. And so now that they can't really fight, Spider-Man tries, and he just pretty much breaks his hands on Superman there. But of course, then they decide, hey, maybe we should team up to fight those villains who escaped. You know, Dr. Octopus and Lex Luthor. Maybe we should go after them. Maybe that would be a good idea. So they do in a call to battle. Call to battle. And so they run up against Lex Luthor and Dr. Octopus. They stop by Africa for a little bit in pursuit. Then they end up in outer space, you know, because this is a big epic adventure. We can go to outer space. Remember, there's no budget on this sort of thing. The art continues to be great, really taking advantage of the full size of this. Dr. Octopus and Lex Luthor temporarily knock out our heroes, but don't kill them because they're foolish villains. And so we end up with a great fight where Spider-Man goes after Lex Luthor and Superman goes after Dr. Octopus, which should take about 2 seconds, but doesn't. But, you know, Superman was just going easy on Dr. Octopus, but this was the inevitable result. I mean, yeah, come on. This was always destined to happen. And it's pretty cool. Now we have like a big tidal wave. You know, the villains have caused a great tidal wave that has to be taken care of course, by Superman, while Spider-Man is up there trying to take care of the villains in space. Superman, of course, does, and they get the villains, and they vow, hey, we should meet each other again sometime and have another adventure, which they do. We've got an epilogue with Clark Kent and Peter Parker, which is awesome. And it's just a fantastic, fun adventure, wonderful team up, and it was really good. It was followed up by another adventure, which was even better, which I will get to eventually with Steve. But I will give you a little preview here where we have Superman and Spider-Man. This is just Superman and Spider-Man. They're not verses anymore because now they're pals. This is a fantastic cover, which I think was this John Romita? Who did this cover? I'll have to look it up. I'm not sure, but it's fantastic. Might be John Buscema did that cover because he illustrates the actual comic book. And it's a great, I think the second adventure with Batman and Superman was even better because it had Big John Buscema, who is one of my favorite artists of all time, stars the evil Dr. Doom, who is an actual adversary who can really give them a run for their money. And we have John Buscema drawing Superman, which is amazing. This is not something you saw ever. And so this comic book is worth its weight in gold just because you have John Buscema drawing Superman. Here I am talking about the second adventure when I said I wasn't going to. I will just say, we have one of the greatest things that ever happened in comic books is when the Hulk and Superman get into a fight. Because in this second adventure, they decide to have the Hulk and Superman, and Wonder Woman shows up, and we get this great scene where Superman is just like, okay, you can't take me out, Hulk. But the angrier Hulk gets, the more powerful he is. And so will the Hulk eventually get so powerful that he'll destroy Superman? Because it looks like it's going in that direction. What happens, I'm not going to tell you. Because I got to talk about that comic book on its own eventually. But yeah, that was Spider-Man versus Superman, or Superman versus Spider-Man, whichever way you want. Again, it is available nowadays in this big old omnibus, which I received as a gift. I'm assuming this was probably really, really expensive. Cover price was $150 when this came out. It's probably, knowing how these omnibus volumes go, it's probably sold out and now it's like a gazillion dollars on eBay or something. But if you've got it, it's pretty awesome. Batman and Captain America. I mean, you have all of these awesome team ups in here. The one I'm really looking forward to reading is two of my favorites together, Superman and the Fantastic Four. So this is an awesome volume if you can still get it. Like I said, Roger, I'm not sure you can. I hope you can. It's awesome. Okay, guys, we'll catch you next time.